Let's talk about fraud in Minnesota. My name is Matt Sepic, and I'm a correspondent for NPR News based in Minneapolis, where I cover courts and legal affairs. You may just now be hearing about fraud in Minnesota, but I've been covering it for nearly 4 years. There are a lot of misconceptions, misinformation, and disinformation out there, so I'm going to break it down and give you a picture of what's really going on in Minnesota. Here's what we know, what we don't, and what comes next. When people talk about fraud in Minnesota, what are they referring to? The main criminal case uncovered hundreds of millions of dollars in pandemic-era fraud centered around the Twin Cities nonprofit Feeding Our Future. Back in January of 2022, with search warrants in hand, the FBI raided Feeding Our Future's offices and 24 other locations. That included the home of Amy Bach, its founder and executive director, where agents found a Gucci purse and a pile of cash. The searches also uncovered thousands of pages of documents. Federal prosecutors and forensic accountants spent the next 8 months sifting through it all. They also subpoenaed a lot of bank and email records. The following September, then U.S. Attorney Andy Luger announced charges against Bach and 46 other people.
The scheme that began with a simple idea in March of 2020 grew to become the largest pandemic fraud in the United States.
By November of 2025, prosecutors would bring charges against 78 people. The majority are Somali-American. A New York Times story about the case drew the attention of President Donald Trump, who used it to attack Democratic Governor Tim Walz. Trump also made racist comments about the Minnesota Somali community at a cabinet meeting.
They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you. Okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason.
Which government programs did the fraudsters rip off? They targeted the Child and Adult Care Food Program and the Summer Food Service Program. Both provide meals to kids in low-income communities when school's not in session. The U.S. Department of Agriculture oversees the programs nationally. The Minnesota Department of Education is tasked with running them on the state level. Child care centers and after-school programs can get reimbursed for the cost of healthy meals and snacks that they serve to kids. But first, they have to sign up with a sponsor, often a nonprofit social service organization, and register as a meal distribution site. The food programs operated quietly for decades, and fraud wasn't a big concern. But that all changed in 2020 with the COVID pandemic. So how did the defendants steal hundreds of millions of dollars from these programs? With schools and child care centers closed during COVID, government regulators made major changes to the rules to keep kids from going hungry. For a time, restaurants were allowed to sign up as meal sites. The USDA also allowed food to be distributed to kids outside of educational programs. On top of that, state employees were working remotely, making oversight difficult. Put together, that opened the floodgates to fraud. Amy Bach and Feeding Our Future began signing up restaurants left and right. While they did distribute some food, it was far less than what they claimed in their fraudulent reimbursement request to the state. One of the biggest offenders was Safari Restaurant on Lake Street in Minneapolis. Its managers claimed to have served nearly 4 million meals to children between April of 2020 and late 2021. Over that time, they stole $16 million from taxpayers. Safari owner Salim Saeed personally pocketed nearly $6 million, which he spent on cars and real estate, including a $1.2 million home in Plymouth, complete with an indoor basketball court. But that's just a small piece of the fraud scheme. Amy Bach and one of her assistants collected millions in kickbacks from Safari and other fake food site operators, and they couldn't sign up the sites fast enough. At Bach and Saeed's trial, prosecutors said the fraud spread like a cancer across Minnesota. Feeding Our Future was founded in 2017, and the next year it distributed around $307,000 in child nutrition program funds. By 2020, at the start of the pandemic, that figure jumped to nearly $43 million, and during the height of the scam in 2021, it peaked at nearly $200 million. So how did this scheme come to light? This exponential growth did not go unnoticed by the Minnesota Department of Education, but despite regulators' concerns, it took a while to stop what the fraudsters started during the pandemic. At Bach's trial and the first Feeding Our Future trial in 2024, jurors heard key testimony from Emily Honer, the Director of Nutrition Program Services at MDE. She said she grew increasingly concerned about the large number of meal site applications from restaurants and found many had not been in business for very long. Honer also testified that the number of meals and the amount of money that the site operators requested were unusually high. In December of 2020, Feeding Our Future requested a single payment of $8 million for just a week's worth of meals. By comparison, Honer said the Minneapolis Public Schools, one of the state's largest districts, received $17 million in federal reimbursement for food in all of 2020. So despite these concerns, why did the taxpayer money continue to flow? MDE stopped allowing restaurants and for-profit businesses to participate as sites for serving meals, so many of the defendants just created nonprofits and kept on submitting phony claims. Some, including Empire Cuisine and Market in Shakopee, also operated fake food vendor companies for other sites. Honer also told jurors she got nowhere with the USDA's Inspector General, so in April of 2021, she contacted the FBI. Honer also notified Feeding Our Future and another nonprofit, Partners in Quality Care, that they were in, quote, serious deficiency. MDE also tried to stop payments to Feeding Our Future, but Bach sued the state and accused regulators of racism against the largely Somali-American food site operators. A Ramsey County judge later told MDE that it did not have the authority to stop the payments. The meal site operators threw a party in 2021 to honor Bach and celebrate their temporary legal victory. They held the celebration at a Lake Street banquet hall that the owner paid for with money stolen from taxpayers. The cash didn't stop flowing until January of 2022, when the federal investigation became public with the FBI raids. So you're probably wondering how many people have been convicted in this case. Of the 78 defendants, 50 have pleaded guilty. And between the two trials, 7 others, including Amy Bach, were convicted. Jurors at the first trial in 2024 acquitted 2 of the defendants, but in an ironic twist, one of the acquitted, Saeed Farah, is in jail and awaiting sentencing for trying to bribe a juror at the end of the trial. Farah, 2 of his co-defendants, and 2 others admitted following the woman out of the courthouse and delivering a Hallmark gift bag with $120,000 in cash to her home in an ill-fated attempt to buy an acquittal. Judge Nancy Brazel dismissed the juror, and lawyers resumed their closing arguments. So far, Brazel has sentenced 8 of the defendants, including all 5 convicted at the 2024 trial. She handed lead defendant Abdiaziz Farah a 28-year prison term. Farah could face even more time when a different judge sentences him in the jury bribery case. Brazel gave the other defendants sentences ranging from 3.5 to 12 years. How much money did the defendants steal overall? Prosecutors say that Feeding Our Future and the 300 phony meal sites it sponsored siphoned around $250 million from taxpayers. But the fraud scheme is much larger than that. Partners in Quality Care, or PIXI, another nonprofit, also sponsored fraudulent meal sites, including many of those operated by the defendants in the first trial. No one from PIXI has been charged in the federal case. Around $60 million in assets have been recovered, but a lot is gone for good because many defendants laundered the money overseas, in some cases by buying real estate in Kenya. Another question we're hearing: is there evidence that any of the stolen money has wound up in the hands of foreign terrorist organizations? In late November, the conservative news site City Journal, largely citing unnamed sources, wrote that, quote, millions of dollars in stolen funds have been sent back to Somalia, where they ultimately landed in the hands of the terror group Al-Shabab. But across 2 trials and thousands of pages of court documents, federal prosecutors have never linked any of the stolen taxpayer money to terrorism. Like fraudsters over time immemorial, the evidence showed that the Feeding Our Future defendants spent their ill-gotten gains on themselves, buying luxury cars, million-dollar homes, and taking lavish trips. Over the last decade and a half, the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office has been aggressive in prosecuting terrorism cases, most notably a group of young Somali-American men who tried to join ISIS. While most of the fraud defendants are also Somali-American, investigators have not presented any evidence of a connection between fraud and terrorist groups. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says his department is investigating whether any tax money has been diverted to Al-Shabaab, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat, said he welcomes the scrutiny but questions the reason and timing behind it. What other kinds of fraud are the feds investigating in Minnesota? Well, the Feeding Our Future case is continuing, and it's led to allegations of widespread fraud in other government programs. In September, prosecutors charged 8 people in Minnesota with stealing millions from the Medicaid Housing Stabilization Services Program, which was meant to help people with disabilities find and maintain housing. Those indictments followed extensive reporting by the TV station KARE 11. The feds also charged one of the Feeding Our Future defendants with stealing $14 million from an autism program. That investigation is continuing also. Critics of Democratic Governor Tim Walz have ripped his administration for not doing enough to oversee the programs and root out fraud. Walz is running for a third term in 2026, and his Republican challengers are making fraud a major campaign issue. Minnesota's Department of Human Services shut down the Housing Stabilization Services program in October after temporary DHS Commissioner Shireen Gandhi said the agency had insufficient controls to stop bad actors from stealing money. Obviously, this is an ongoing, developing story. To stay up to date on the Feeding Our Future case and other fraud investigations, make sure you're tuning into NPR News on the radio and online at nprnews.org.